Hi, I'm Joe Quirk. Welcome to the Blue Frontiers podcast about seasteading the environment, special economic zones, and innovation in science, technology, governance, and society itself. People can do almost everything better. That's why Blue Frontiers will provide innovators with sustainable, peaceful, floating islands based on voluntary cooperation and deploy them around the world to help communities adapt to sea level change and promote emergent and self-organized ways of living free at sea. This is the founder series of the Blue Frontiers podcast. Today we have Nicolas Germineau, my friend and managing director and co-founder of Blue Frontiers. It's great to have big ideas, but how do you actually strategize to make them happen and work through all the implications, legally, ethically, with all the relationships and messaging? Nicolas has a talent for thinking through all these decision trees and guiding us to the next smart step. He never stops reminding us of our core mission: provide the technology for new societies and serve communities threatened with sea level change. Let's find out what makes Nick tick. Now, here's your host, the Sea Evangelist, Natalie Meza Garcia.
Hello, Seasteaders. Today I'm with Nicolas Germineau, co-founder and managing director of Blue Frontiers, and also a speaker of many languages. Nick is a software engineer who joined the seasteading movement many years ago as a volunteer, and then he became the strategic advisor of the Seasteading Institute, and today he manages in Blue Frontiers a project called Blue Communities, which consists on organizing seasteading communities. So stay tuned, because this is the first time that we are going to publicly speak about Blue Community. So Nick is also the person who mediated between the firm hired by Blue Frontiers to do the legal studies in French Polynesia to see the viability of the special economic zone on the sea, the sea zone. So Nick and I are both right now here in England, where it's been snowing for the past days. And last time I saw you, Nick, in person, we were in sunny Tahiti in French Polynesia, where we lived and worked for 2 months at the Blue Frontiers headquarters, and where I saw that your excitement for seasteading came also with a lot of imagination and passion, but most importantly, also with a lot of hard work. So tell me, Nick, before deepening into the details of this very interesting chat that I have the pleasure of having with you, how are you, and how is this beautiful, snowy British weather treating you?
Very nice to be with you, Natalie, and particularly in this beautiful, snowy, but very enjoyable day. Actually, I used to live in New Hampshire. When I was younger, I spent about a year in America, New Hampshire, and snow there is no joke. So it was much colder, much snowier, and I really loved it. So people there, they really hated the snow because they'd had to deal with it for so long. But I was new to it, so it was just another beautiful day after another one. So today we have a bit of snow. I love every minute of it. I'm very happy. But to be honest with you, French Polynesia was very, very nice too. I like it warm. So I guess if I had my way, we'd have only 2 seasons. We'd have a very hot, summer, and we would have a very cold winter, and nothing in between. That's my ideal.
That's where we're heading to, it seems.
I was going to say, but I'm not losing hope on having a seastead in some cold place as well. Ideally one in some tropical place and one in a very cold place, and I would kind of jump in seasteads.
I haven't heard you mention that before. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, how would it be?
Good question. I don't know, but I think it would be, of course, very different. Obviously. But I think people would spend a lot more time indoors, I guess, in the cold one. But at the same time, with virtual reality and with instant communications and all that, I think you can make a very cold, snowy seastead pretty to look at and still very enjoyable. So yes. I'm not losing hope on that. I think we'll have a cold seastead someday as well.
And with heaters.
Heaters, yeah, definitely.
Well, there is actually one thing in common between one of the coldest places in the world, Antarctica, and a seastead, and it's that they are both extraterritorial places. So places with special regulations outside of the traditional boundaries of nation states. And it is extremely fascinating to get informed and to know more about it. So I guess the first question I want to ask you is, when was the first time that you heard about seasteading? Because back then in 2008, when you joined, it wasn't so common, so well known as it is nowadays.
Yeah, right. Well, it will be kind of difficult for me to really think of the first time. I mean, back when I first was exposed to floating structures, I think we did not call it seasteading. At least I did not call it seasteading. But Jules Verne wrote about it in his novels. We had 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea as well. So we had plenty of exposure to small microcosms on the high seas. People spending a lot of time in isolated places, also desert islands. In some ways, I would liken to a proto-seastead. Just not mobile, but still, it's an isolated society, which in some ways reminds me of seasteading. But my first exposure, I guess, that I really remember very vividly was when I was a boy. I was subscribed to this Science and Futurism magazine, and yeah, in one of the issues, they had this feature on floating structures. And, they looked like islands or cities. They had a bit of both. They had some natural looking ones and they had some very futuristic looking ones. And I was so awestruck and inspired by what I saw. And it stayed with me ever since. Like, I guess the teenager that I became was still thinking about it, and the young adult that I became also thought about it regularly. I was just so inspired by it. Wow. And at the time, of course, I had no political, inspirations. I had no knowledge of economics and how the world worked, and no sociological background or anything like that. So I was just, inspired by the architecture, the engineering, and the challenges. Yeah. So that was, I guess, my very first exposure to a proto-seastead, I suppose, because without the political components, I guess you can't call it a seastead necessarily. But there was already, in this vision, the notion of city-states on the high seas. I think, it was very clear that those were separate structures, self-sufficient and big enough to hold a real community with lots of people working towards some common goals. So to me, that was the very first thing. And of course, eventually I stumbled onto Patrick's blog before he started the Institute. And so I guess that was maybe in 2007 or 8, something like that, I suppose. And that's when I really started to think of those structures as potential hosts for parallel experimentation in societal governance and structures.
That was at the very, very, very beginning.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, how did you get involved? Because you started as a volunteer of the Seasteading Institute, and now you're co-founder and managing director of the first company in the world that has managed to reach a point where there is an agreement with a host nation to build the first seastead in the world. So how did that transition take place?
Well, when I followed Patrick's blog, of course, it was obviously the natural thing for me to join this institute and to volunteer a little bit and to donate and to participate in any way that I could at the time. I didn't have much time though. But on the side,
you don't have time now either.
No, I had way more time back then, actually. Yeah, it was much easier for me to do things outside of my job at the time. Okay. Today, there's nothing outside of my job. In my personal life, nothing. That's another topic.
I know how you feel.
Yeah, but we're all in the same boat, so to speak. I know.
We're on the same seastead.
Yeah, on the same seastead.
Uh-huh.
And so I guess, I helped any way I could, but one thing I did also was work on shipsteads as well. So I had some parallel things that I was doing, which, I try to get some quotes for designing shipsteads, tailored to seasteaders' needs. And of course, it was not easy to really arrange that, particularly on the little amount of time that I had at the time. I also tried to think of smaller sized shipsteads, so mostly single family shipsteads, and things like very cheap and low maintenance catamarans and things like that. So I had one commissioned at the time. So, those kinds of things, but nothing really panned out. Everything turned out to be much more complicated than I thought originally. Seasteading is always like that. It seems easier than it actually is. But, it's also part of the challenge and why it's so interesting for us to be working on this, I guess. Exactly. Yeah. And one thing I did, of course, for TSI was I researched a lot on potential host nations, and I focused quite a bit on the Pacific. And one day, Mark Collins, who you interviewed before on this podcast, I think.
Yes, he was the first guest of our podcast.
Yep. Yeah. So Mark reached out to us, from French Polynesia, and things just started to snowball from there. And of course, next thing you know, we're talking to that, and that's one of the potential locations for the first seastead. So Mark and I and Joe and Igor and Randy, we co-founded Blue Frontiers, and the rest is history, I guess.
Wow. And why do you think that there are so many people in so many places in the world, in so many different locations, with so many different life paths that are attracted to seasteading?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I've met a lot of seasteaders, and they all have different reasons for being involved, and and most of us, we have some common reasons as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I guess one thing which is a very common theme is the idea of micronations, and I guess having a stronger influence on the things surrounding us, and how the societies that we inhabit are being governed, I guess. And so the micronation trend, I think, existed before seasteading. It's been here for a long time. And micronations actually, interestingly enough, I think go very well with desert islands and micronation projects trying to get a hold of desert islands. And in the past, before I stumbled into Patrick's blog, I actually was also a bit in the micronations movement. And of course, I was looking at desert islands. Yeah, a little bit. I had a website, actually. I'm kind of ashamed to give the URL now. Well, I hope it's not in some internet archive anymore, but it used to be called freeislandrepublic.net, I think. Islandrepublic.net. I hope it's not on the internet anymore.
I'm going to look for it now.
Oh boy, I hope it doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, so the idea at the time was to find a desert island, and to make it my own free island republic, and have a constitution and all those good things. And of course, I'm just one of thousands of people who had thought of exactly the idea. And just like everybody else, I found out that it's not possible today to buy both the island and sovereignty to go with it. So you can go and buy a desert island. It's easy to do, but you're not going to be able to be your own king on that island.
I mean, you can be your own king. Like in the micronations movement, there are a lot of kings, and there's a lot of principalities also. But because we live in a world where nation states are the focus, and if we are not recognized by other nations, then it's going to be considered like a child's game.
Yeah. That's the conclusion that I reached very quickly, unfortunately. And my hopes and dreams of being King Nicholas I just were shattered forever. So, yeah.
King Nicholas
Seasteading is the next best thing for me, I guess. It's the one that's going to succeed. So yeah. I think micronations and desert islands go well together, and both actually sort of go back to seasteading, because seasteading gives you everything that you actually need to make a micronation for real, as opposed to just dreaming about it. And like you said, exactly. Just having a game, pretending that you're when you can't be. But seasteading is actually a very serious endeavor, which allows you to actually improve on existing societal structures for yourself and people who want to do that independently of you as well. So I think it's a fascinating thing, and it does in many ways link up very well with the micronation idea as well.
Yes, I actually went once to I don't remember what it stands for, but it was the Unified Council of Many Wiki Micronations. And when you dive into that world, you see that it's an actual world. They have constitutions, they have treaties against each other, they have crafted their rules. One even kicked out someone who was living like physically in the real, well, what is real? In this world, in his house, because they had some sort of conflict in the micronations world virtually. So it was really interesting how we seem to all be driven by attempts of having more control over the rules that affect us. So all these things you mentioned ultimately are related to finding different ways of living, finding better rules, adopting better solutions. But this varies a lot from person to person. So seasteading is very complex, as you know, as you mentioned, but this doesn't mean complicated. It simply means that there is a huge richness of angles from where you can look at it. And this actually makes it unique and very special, because you can look at it from a society point of view, political, economic, technological, environmental, anything you can think of, really. So, but as we were talking before, people are very different one from another. So how does seasteading solve questions related to individual preferences in a world that is very characterized by diversity?
Well, I think it's extremely true what you said. It's it's something we probably don't think about enough. Very often we think about the best something as opposed to what is the most optimized for specific people, because we're not all exactly alike.
Exactly.
When you hear about seasteading, very often we hear about, it's going to be a more efficient system because we're starting from scratch and we're going to have better rules. Maybe we're going to be inventing new and better solutions, and those solutions will spill over into the wider world and people will benefit from it elsewhere. And of course, it's not just about creating new and better solutions, it's also about adopting existing solutions which are not really being applied. Maybe people talk about it, maybe those technologies exist, but they're not being deployed. Maybe those new societal paradigms have been explored hypothetically before, but never tried. So, we can do that on seasteads. And people talk about that and they think about this, and we tend to think it's going to be about discovering the best set of rules that apply uniformly to everyone. That's very often what I see. And I think it's probably not what's going to happen, although, I could be wrong, and I guess seasteading will put that to the test. But I'm more expecting that, we're going to have different seasteads optimized for different people. And what I mean by that, preference maximization is something which I think is very important. Current societies are full of compromises, right? Like you have to compromise with your neighbors and your neighbors with you. And the whole society is basically trying to optimize for some kind of average person. There's no such person, right? Like nobody is average. We're all somewhat average in some things and very different from the average in many other things. So I'm very rarely the average person, so I very rarely have a rule set which is optimized for me. It's optimized for the average person, which I'm not, and which neither are you. So some people, they have different characters, like they're very risk tolerant or very risk averse. Some people prefer individual lifestyles, others communal lifestyles, and it's very probable to me that different societies would actually benefit from being optimized in different ways to benefit those different people differently. So I think rules and structures which may work better for some people may not work very well for others, and we would probably be all better off if we had different seasteads optimized for our own set of preferences, as opposed to trying to apply the same rules uniformly to everyone. So it's not about like right or wrong answers or finding the best thing. I think it's more about applying new and existing systems in different ways to different people so that we have an optimal outcome for them. And one other thing, I guess, also is that once you have this, how do you keep it optimized, right? When you have a seastead which works very well for you, very often in existing societies, you don't know what's going to change tomorrow. And it's quite possible that things will change to maximize different preferences from yours. Even though it's working for you today, it may not work for you tomorrow. Exactly. And I think seasteaders, don't really have this problem, maybe, at least hopefully we'll find out again, but I think so, because we have the power of exit and entry as opposed to just voice. Today you can complain about things, but it's probably better if you can just, have discontents leave and go and find something better, or found something better for themselves. And as a result, everybody is more likely to find a seastead which works for them. And those seasteads are also much more likely to remain optimized for the people who enjoy living in them, as opposed to changing all of a sudden. So, in many ways, I think seasteading hopefully will be about satisfying needs which we have, higher needs, I guess. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I guess we think of seasteads as being able to feed the poor, clothe the hungry. Clothe the poor, feed the hungry, and all the other good things that seasteading will probably supercharge. But at the same time, I think it's probably also work wonders for higher level needs and fulfill people better.
I completely
just being happy.
Agree. Yeah. So it's about voluntarily associating, seeking for what makes you feel comfortable and what doesn't make you feel comfortable. Self-sorting, actually. So
true.
Intentional communities, but floating, you could say.
Yes, I think it's a good way to put it. Mm-hmm. Intentional communities are nothing new, right? Like, people have been trying to sort themselves into, better and more optimized communities for the longest time. And of course, I see this self-sorting as a precondition, really, of preference maximization. If you want to be happy, you probably need to be with people who at least care the most about the same things you care the most about, right? Wow. So I doubt that you could put communists and capitalists, for example, in charge of the exact same levers, societal levers. I think they would fight endlessly, and neither would be very happy, right? So self-sorting is very important in this way, and intentional communities being the embodiment of that, will just allow the kinds of seasteads that I described before and that we discussed, to maximize preferences for specific types of people. And everybody, again, can be happier maximally because they're not forced to be together. So they have this voluntary association. It's a notion which I think is very dear to seasteaders' hearts, and to you, I know, Natalie.
Yes.
So
yeah,
this is really basically like a voluntary association in intentional communities on steroids on the water.
Whoa, I love it. I absolutely love it. So what you're saying is that seastead would provide a perfect place for having a physical location for either intentional communities that already exist in land, such as Cristania, for example, in Denmark, or Gaviota in Colombia, or even something like the Venus Project, which is not exactly an intentional community, but is somewhere. It could also benefit from what seasteading can give.
Yeah, I think what's missing in existing intentional communities, at least in some of them, is the flexibility that is afforded by having a special governing framework, which allows you more leeway in what you can try or what you can do and cannot do. And in many ways, intentional communities today, they're still bound by national laws and many other laws which apply fully to those areas, at least in most areas. I think Christiania may be a bit different. You can tell me more about that. But in general, it's true of most intentional communities, right? Like, they have to still abide by 100% of the national rules that they're under. And that's something which limits their scope in terms of optimizing for their preferences, as we discussed earlier. And I think this is something seasteading aims to solve by basically having, a much wider scope of what can be tried in those intentional communities and putting them much more in charge of the governance and the societal structures that they're living in. And today we have compared to 50 years ago or 100 years ago, of course, we have much better technology. And since I'm a software engineer, I tend to see every seasteading problem as a software nail to hammer, basically, right? Yeah. So I think in many ways we can use software to help with the formation and the organization, the maintenance, and the growing of those kinds of intentional communities. And the self-sorting also can be made much easier and also scale much better for the first time in history, because we have the internet, because we have the blockchain, because we have all these decentralized tools that we can use to reach a lot of people globally and organize communities, intentional communities on the water.
That's true. And if someone asks, for example, because I know that some people can have a fear of, okay, so if you have this system where exiting is possible, how would you guarantee that things don't get out of control? But you mentioned software, and it becomes really important in this context, because then you can have things like reputation mechanisms. Like in open source software, for example. So not only you can use software to gather together these groups of people, but also to guarantee that exiting is not used, is used in its right form. And it's really silly if you think that we can exit pretty much in every aspect of our lives, or that almost every other aspect of our life, rather than governance and everything it governs. So everything, in every aspect, we are allowed to self-organize and to associate voluntarily with our friends, with who we choose to as partners, even where we move to. There's some freedom there, unless you put the passport, and then, but at least locally, or more or less locally, then you have some sort of freedom. But when it comes to choosing the rules, like things that are really fundamental to society organization, then we cannot. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's true. And like you mentioned a few things. I mean, you mentioned, for example, passports. This is something which does not really apply much in the open ocean. We don't really have borders or people to stop you and say you can't go to this seastead or that seastead. If they will accept you, then you can just go there. And of course, we're trying to do the same thing, because it's not just about the open ocean, right? Like, what we're doing today is mostly protected waters. So we have special agreements that we negotiate with host nations. And like I said, one of those host nations is French Polynesia, where we basically try to make these barriers as irrelevant as possible, so that people can actually freely go from one seastead to another, or even found new seasteads. So we're trying to make it easy to exit, and trying to also to make it easy to move, because physically it's also kind of difficult sometimes when you have to uproot yourself a lot. But in our case, you're going to have lots of seasteads, very near to each other, and it's going to be much easier to go from one to the next, or even to move your house, because we have this concept of dynamic geography, which allows you to detach your part of the seastead to go and join another seastead. So in many ways, it's kind of forking on a physical level. This is one way we refer to it.
Yeah, forking.
Yeah. Just like you would fork I don't know, some software or another, you can also fork seasteads in some way as well. And we can apply this to the the concept of community formation online as well, before we even do this in the physical world.
Yes, and I actually consider seasteads as a fork of nation states. And that concept of forking was actually what got me into seasteading, because I was looking for a way in which we could fork the nation state. And I definitely think at least when you look for a host nation, it is like a fork. It comes from somewhere, but it has its own new nature. So I'm so happy that we committed 1 year ago and 1 month ago. 1 year and 1 month ago, we did the commit thing with the signature for a lot of understanding with the French Polynesian government. But okay, so Blue Frontiers is right now studying many possible locations and there is one with the one that is more advanced is French Polynesian, right? But we've
Yeah.
also touched that the world is very diverse and that there's a lot of people who feel attracted to seasteading without necessarily having the same backgrounds. So if Blue Frontiers is creating many seasteads, how do you define the nature of Blue Frontiers if we need to take into account so much diversity and so much complexity?
Right. I think, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, when I had this micronation idea in mind, and it was really about what I wanted. It was really about, what structures would make me happy. Maybe I wouldn't be king, but at least I would have something which, is a constitution that I drafted, which speaks to my needs, my hopes, and my desires, right? Like, this is what I had in mind at the time. But seasteading changed that for me. Seasteading took the focus away from what I wanted and took it at a higher level, I think, at a meta level. Now I'm trying to basically build a system which is as neutral as possible so that Blue Frontiers can actually be an enabler and not a decider. Like, we all want different things, as we discussed before, at least not all different things, but we want a variety of things, and we're satisfied in a variety of different ways. And as a result, I think seasteading is about empowering others, at least for Blue Frontiers, as a toolmaker, which I see Blue Frontiers as. So seasteading, is admitting that we don't know, right? Like, I don't know what is best for you. I don't even know what is best for me, really. I kind of know what I want, but I don't really know necessarily how to get there. And therefore, I should try things, and so should you. So it's about trying and doing things and not arguing. That's something we say very often. Let's stop arguing and start seasteading. Well, I think this is really what Blue Frontiers is enabling people to do, because, people don't want to try my vision of the perfect community. They want to try their vision of the perfect community. So Blue Frontiers should make this possible for them. And that's what I see Blue Frontiers as doing, a neutral tool maker. And in terms of things to try, there's just so many things. I mean, it's a crazy wide spectrum out there. And things change, circumstances change, the environment changes, technology changes, and I think there's good arguments for revisiting.
Even personal tastes change through time.
Even personal tastes, yeah.
Your preferences and values.
Very true, yeah. But yeah, as a result, I think there's good arguments, for revisiting old paradigms that maybe didn't work before, but now could. Maybe different scale also does change things, in meaningful ways as well. And there's also arguments for trying completely new things which have never been tried before, but have been theorized as being beneficial for some people in some ways under some circumstances. So there's a wide spectrum of things to try, and I don't presume that Blue Frontiers will know what to try. I presume that Blue Frontiers will empower others who do know what to try.
So Blue Frontiers creates the physical platform, and at the same time, it serves as a society platform so that people come and experiment, if that's the word you want to use, or create their own communities, right? So I've heard you talking in the past about how we could embrace 3D printing, AI, automation, Internet of Things. Please tell us a bit about all these cool things that you imagine can happen on a seastead, can exponentially grow and become more ubiquitous and interesting.
Yeah, those are things which I think will be very important to seasteaders. It's just a guess, and this is things we're working on because we want to produce tools which will allow people to seastead more easily, at least in the beginning. But at the same time, different groups, different people, different seasteaders will see things differently. So they may embrace and not others, and we'll see a wide variety of people trying a wide variety of things, as is our theme today, apparently. But I think in many ways, seasteads, in some ways, they're great for pushing the self-sufficiency envelope because we're starting from scratch in a resource-poor environment. So it's harder, for sure. But at the same time, it's also easier because you don't have any of the old to push aside to make way for the new. So you can optimize structures. You can adopt the latest technologies right away. You can optimize the entire infrastructure for the latest paradigms. So you can use 3D printing more liberally. You can, of course, build everything around AI and automation as much as possible today, at least. And you can embrace, generally speaking, all the technologies of a world of abundance. At least that's the hope of those technologies, is to make scarcity a thing which is less and less relevant over time. And I think it's more urgent and also easier at the same time with seasteading. Because you're starting from this position of having to do it, and you have to put the effort in the design of it, and after, so that you can afterwards reap the benefits and have the same standards of living within a much more constrained environment in some ways. And for that, it requires some upfront investment into those technologies, I think.
And in the design of for example, I know that from May 2017 to December, there were some work groups within Blue Frontiers that were very deeply studying every single thing we could think of, literally the whole range of possibilities for making the seastead fully 100% not sustainable, but restorative. So no special, and we had a 2 weeks discussion about toilets.
Oh yeah, the toilet discussion.
The toilet discussion, yes, the toilet discussion, and it's important because it's about. I wouldn't say sustainability again, but it is really about how can we create a way of living that doesn't repeat the same mistakes of the past, and that allow communities, however you define community. Yeah, how would you define a community?
Well, I think it's probably an open-ended definition that we need, I guess. I suppose I would say it's people who have things in common. But what are those things? I mean, our goals in common, sufficient, resources in common, rules in common, all of the above. I mean, how much in common is enough to make a community, and how little do you have to still be called a community? And how small is too small? I mean, a community of one probably is not a community, but 2, 5, 100, 2,000, is it 10,000? What is a community? It's kind of hard to say. And conversely, how big is too big? I mean, if you have a community of 9 billion human beings, is that really a community in a meaningful way? Or is it more like the Dunbar number, right? Do you have to have this way of connecting meaningfully with people on a psychological level for it to be called a community? I think maybe those questions should be left unanswered, or maybe seasteading will answer those questions, because we will find out that people in some seasteads really feel that they're part of the community, and others don't in other seasteads, which are structured differently. So I guess we'll find the answer maybe through seasteading, I hope.
There are some seasteads where, I'm sure we'll find the answers, and there will be some seasteads where the sense of community is not so central, and there will be other seasteads where more evidently sharing traits, it's more relevant. So the cool thing, or one of the coolest things about seasteading, is that you have, again, the whole range of possibilities. I'm excited. I know, and we've had this discussion in the past, actually, of what would a community be? Is it 1, 2, or 150? And I'm really glad that you mentioned the Dunbar number, because once I was talking with a maths professor here at the university, and when I was telling him about seasteading, about the floating island project, the first thing he asked me was, how many people? So I told him, well, we are looking right now between 200 and 300. And he said, why don't you check for the Dunbar number? And that it's definitely, maybe even maths problems we are going to have answers for, not only society, but also with testing the Dunbar number. So for those who don't know, the Dunbar number is it says that people can have maximum 150 real or close ties. That beyond 150 is just too much. That's the Dunbar number.
Yeah, and we see this in so many aspects of a certain number, usually units start to break down, whether it's in the military or whether it's in companies and or just villages. Cohesiveness, starts to suffer if you exceed the Dunbar number, and it seems to have been replicated all over the world as well, from what I read. So, yeah, it's a universal thing, more or less.
And it applies only for humans, or we don't know?
At least I don't know. I don't know if you know.
Okay, if you don't know, nobody knows.
Yep. Well.
So now that we are talking about communities, and the reason why I ask you what would we consider a community is because of the project you are leading in Blue Frontiers, which is called Blue Communities. So what is Blue Communities about? And this is the first time that we have ever spoken publicly about it, and I am super excited.
Yeah, it's still an early stage idea, so that's why we haven't been communicating much about it. We don't want to set expectations, and we're still really working out the kinks of it. But the idea of Blue Communities is basically to organize seasteading already, at the global level.
Yes.
Which allows physical instantiation later. So today, you get together with like-minded people, and of course, maybe you know them from before, or maybe you find them on Blue Communities, a platform which allows you to connect with those kinds of people, and you get together and you work on governance and societal structures, goals for the seastead, all kinds of things which communities need to think about and organize beforehand. And as you mentioned before, some communities actually don't really want to do a whole lot of that in common. You have a lot of communities which don't really place a lot of emphasis on communal action, but a lot of emphasis on individual action. So that's also part of it. So there's a whole spectrum which would be represented in Blue Community.
Wow.
And we have a lot of activity on there. Then we have a lot of people who can be matched to seasteads, which Blue Frontiers makes available for them, and designs for them as well. So today, as you mentioned earlier, we're looking at a few places in the Pacific, one of them being French Polynesia. And of course, several types of designs, and some of them are going to be more or less conducive to different kinds of communities. So Blue Communities will also allow us to better understand what people want and to also better design for them. So, it's a patchwork, and it has a lot of different goals, and we're trying to bring all of this online as soon as possible so that people can start using it. And eventually we'll have a lot of people excited and ready to move to seasteads.
So how are you preparing for all this?
Well, not fast enough. So there's just so much to do, unfortunately. But we're basically working mostly on the software stack for now, but there's going to be a lot more to it because we want to organize communities not just virtually, but we also want to facilitate physical instantiation even before seasteads are available. So there's lots of work to do on that. I can't really go into the details today, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. And I guess the very near term thing that people can do is go to the website and register their interest in living on a seastead someday, and we'll use that to hook them up to Blue Communities when it becomes available later. So go to the website and show your interest.
And so if I am one person, for example, and I am interested in joining the Blue Communities project, whether alone or with a group of friends, is that okay? Like, can I be one individual to be part of one community, one that is either previously created by Blue Frontiers or one that I want to create myself and lead?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's actually the main goal, really, to have people drive it. So Blue Frontiers is mostly receding in the background. Like I said before, we're neutral tool makers, right? So we allow people to organize themselves, but we don't direct their communities. So if you want to register as an individual, you can register as an individual and you could say, hey, I'm into individual seasteads. And if we have an individual seastead available for you, then, that's what we will match you to. But if you say, hey, I'd like to link up with like-minded people, and this is what I'm into, and those are the things that I care about, and so on and so forth, then you could find other people either in an existing community, or you could get together and start a new community that is going to cater to your needs and hopes and desires. So, you can both found new communities or find existing communities, or just be by yourself.
Can it be also based on skills?
Yeah, it's open-ended as much as we can make it. So at least we'll try to do that. And the idea is you can associate based on goals which you set, and those goals dictate the types of people who you may want to attract. So maybe it's a seastead based on, I don't know, let's say food production, for example, because for some reason, you have a very cool idea on how to produce food sustainably, and we have a working group on that, actually. That's why I mentioned this.
And that's huge right now globally.
Yeah, exactly.
To create more sustainable ways of producing food.
Yeah. So it could be a community which is not so much trying to, try something new in terms of societal goals, but it could be also business goals. So you could have that as well. Or maybe you're into, I don't know, basic income, for example, and maybe, this is something which you want to get together with other people. Maybe you get funded by some, I don't know, Y Combinator or whatever, some company to run the experiments, or some governmental organization, or maybe you do it because you think you have the secret sauce to make it work within your seastead, without any help from the outside. So you get together and you organize something around basic income. Or maybe it's something completely different. Maybe it's, just everything is decentralized in a blockchain, and everything works according to smart rules enforced in smart contracts. And, you have polycentric law and all these things into, and that's what you get together with other people to make happen. And maybe you need people with specific skills for that. In the former case that I mentioned, maybe you need people with skills useful in food production, aquaculture, hydroponics, and all those things. But for the latter case that I mentioned, for blockchain, maybe you need a lot of blockchain programmers. So yeah, skills do matter a lot. Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can also. So, and what's the next step for Blue communities? Are you thinking about something similar to maybe an online process for registering or application like Mars 100, Asgardia, Estonia?
Yes, today the only thing you can do today is register your interest. So you just go to the website, you put your email, and you tick the box that says you'd like to live on the seastead. So that's the easy and quick thing you can do today. So pause the podcast, go to the website, put your email in, tick the box, and hit the send button.
I love it. And the website is blue-frontiers.com. And it's there.
Yes.
Scroll down at the end, it says register.
There you go. Yeah, it's on every page. So we want people to register. Yeah. So that's the very first step that people can take. But of course, as we get closer to release, then, we will actually have a formal onboarding process, which is going to be online. So people will be able to go to a specific page and actually go through an onboarding process.
I love it. Can I register?
Natalie, you're the first on the list.
Actually, I'm registered already. It seems that I registered in different moments. So I received 3 times the emails that Blue Frontiers sends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or, registering early, we anticipate that we're going to have a lot of interest.
Yes.
And to go around at first, unfortunately, we're going to be working on ramping up production and having more locations for people to go to. But we have to start with something and ramp up, and scale up production. So at first, it's very likely that it's going to be a bottleneck. So to be considered, to be on the first seasteads, then you should register early and try to get organized early in the communities when it's available. And you can register today, like I said.
Okay, in that case, I won't register and I know that you won't either, not because it's your project, but because I have heard you. I remember that I once asked you in French Polynesia, when we were in Tahiti, how would your ideal community be? And I really liked your answer because you said, I just want to create the platform. I just want to create it and for it to be a place, a space for people to create their own community. So you see yourself more as a facilitator.
I'm fascinated by the amount of good ideas others have. And I want to watch it all and compare and brainstorm and, you know, ideate and see what they do. And it's fascinating to me. So, yeah.
From your seastead in the cold in Antarctica.
Yes, absolutely.
From Antarctica. I like it.
Yeah. One day a month outdoors and the rest of the time in VR or something like that.
Well, I would love it. You can visit my seastead on VR. I am really looking forward to all the possibilities that seasteading can bring, especially from the governance, but also from the technological point of view. I see an exponential increase in VR meets seasteading.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
I mean, it's an obvious thing to say, but internet access is very important. So that's why we go to locations where we have internet access. And of course, you know, we keep in mind the needs of tomorrow's societies. You know, lots of VR and lots of need for bandwidth in general, not just VR. But yeah.
How do you feel, Nick? Because you started as a volunteer of the Seasteading Institute, and right now you are here having this really interesting conversation with me, where you are telling me all the things you're actually thinking to do in your company. How does it feel to see your dream becoming true?
Well, most days, to be perfectly frank, I just feel overwhelmed. It's just so much to do. Yeah, it's fascinating, of course, and there's lots of brilliant people that I meet every day, and lots of new ideas, and all of that is really, you know, exhilarating. Really, the most exciting moments are, of course, when we get together and we ideate, and especially in places like French Polynesia. Obviously, you know, we have the people and the location, but most days, yeah, it's really overwhelming. It's just so much work. It's very challenging as well, you know, which is rewarding, but also tiring at times. And like you said, you know, earlier, we don't have much of a life outside of Blue Frontiers anymore, but I guess it's the price to pay to work on something with possibilities.
That's fine. I read an article a few days ago that reevaluated that phrase called you know, you've probably heard about it, work-life balance. So the author was saying that instead of seeking work-life balance, a satisfactory life nowadays should entail more work-life integration. So, for example, instead of seeing your work as I need to wake up at 8 and then be from 9 to 5. I don't know if he's doing some work for some company that I don't really care about and they don't care about me, and then go back home and finally I can relax. No, that is wrong. And if you think about it, it's wrong because it makes you look at your work without the love that some more free, challenging, but at the same time rewarding at a personal level, like the one you are doing, and also like the one I'm doing. Even if there's no schedule from 9 to 5, it allows you to feel more satisfied with your life, and you can be working until 2:30 a.m., 3:30 a.m., as I know you were yesterday, and it simply doesn't matter, right?
Absolutely, yeah, that's the way I feel. Yeah, summed it up very well.
Okay, so we need to go to a meeting now.
Yes, we do. As always. Yeah. Well, thank you, Natalie.
No, Nick, thank you very, very, very much. And I'm really happy to see that. And this is an example for all the people who want to join the seasteading movement. You join as a volunteer. I want to emphasize that. And now you are co-founder and managing Blue Communities. I find it an extremely interesting journey. And thank you very much for being here, Nick. It was really nice to talk to you. And we'll talk again when Blue Communities is officially launched.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Blue Frontiers podcast. To learn more about our work and find out how you can support the project, visit blue-frontiers.com or visit our social channels. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Blue Frontiers, or shoot us a note via our website. If you learned something and enjoyed the show, tell a friend or leave us a positive review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our show and remember to join us for the next episode. See you next time.
Our closing tune was written by Metua Heimatari, Mata from Tahiti.